Hello, everyone. My name is Casey Moes, and I'm going to moderate this panel on allyship and inclusivity. In the spirit of inclusivity, if anybody wanted to move forward to the front of the room, that would be awesome. Just so we can see you. We're an intimate group, but that will lead a great conversation. I'm going to go through some very abbreviated bios here, and then we're going to go straight into some questions that we've had a little discussion about ahead of time. So, again, this is the panel on allyship and inclusivity, leadership and inclusivity. And I'll start with my background. My name is Casey Moes. I was an Army officer for 23 years in the military police, where I served in various roles in law enforcement and in force protection. Now I work in corporate travel management as a director of sales and in account management, and I'm pleased to be serving as your moderator. So next, we have Helen Archontou. I'm sorry. Archontou. We went over this right beforehand. Archontou. She's the CEO of the YWCA in Northern New Jersey. Her direct mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. And under her leadership, she expanded the organization's service to Essex, Hudson, Morris, and Passaic County, in addition to Bergen County, where it began. Again, very abbreviated bio. I want you to please look at the bios online so you can hear everything that she's done. Next, Miss Gail Friedberg Rottenstrich. Close enough. She's the CEO and co-founder of ZAGO Manufacturing Company. ZAGO. That's okay. Manufacturing Company, a woman-owned business, a global producer of sustainable ceiling fasteners and components. As a former corporate attorney, Gail started her business with her husband nearly 30 years ago through the New Jersey Small Business Incubator. She's now an employer of over 30 people in a solar-powered facility in New York, New Jersey, and also the mayor of her town. So, very impressive panelists. Next, we have Mr. Matthew Adams, Esquire. He's a partner with Fox Rothschild. He's the co-chair of the firm's white-collared criminal defense and regulatory compliance practice group. He's an experienced criminal and civil trial attorney, and is a diverse national practice focused on criminal defense, regulation compliance, and complex community litigation. So, again, very brief bios, but we don't want to spend time on all the bios when you can read them. We want you to be engaged in this conversation and hear what we have to say on this topic. So, we will start. The first question I have for all my panelists, and they're going to answer just in turn, is can you please provide us an example of an incredibly inclusive ally in your career? Go ahead, Helen.
I'll start. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. This is a very important conversation and topic for me. It's kind of core at my work in terms of my work at the YWCA of Northern New Jersey. You know, I think of over the course of my career, you know, when I think of allyship, and, you know, we were talking about definitions as we were planning for this. I mean, you can be an ally for someone, you know, in lots of different ways in terms of supporting someone who is maybe a different race than you and being able to support them in the workplace, someone who's different, you know, represents differently as from a gender perspective, or just as a coworker. I mean, there's lots of different ways to show up as an ally and think about that. You know, for me, the one experience in the course of my career, many moons ago now, when I worked at the prosecutor's office, which was a pretty male-dominated environment, and I came in 25 years old, wanting to save the world. Still want to save the world, not 25 anymore. But, you know, I went into this environment.
26.
Thank you. Yes. But when I went into that environment, there were a few female leaders that were in that space. And, you know, I watched them do it for others when they came in, and they kind of came to me and, you know, for lack of a better word, you know, kind of enveloped me, wrapped around me, and kind of supported me through kind of getting comfortable in that space, because at that time there were not a lot of women, you know, that were working there. And I have to say, and I know, you know, this is something when you think about allyship and how do you kind of breed more of it, it was really, seeing other people do that when I joined the organization, then it was something that I just naturally did myself as well. For when other women came into that same space, they kind of modeled it for me, and then it just felt right to do it as well. So I think that that's one example of how it can show up in a workplace.
So when I started my career as a corporate attorney, now about almost 40 years ago, allyship wasn't a thing. It really, I mean, to me, it didn't exist in those, high pressure spaces. And I think I didn't thrive in those spaces because of that, because I was looking for allies and I didn't find allies. And the other women who were in the firms that I were in were just always like hyper stressed, just under so much pressure, usually single and feeling like they didn't have the space for a family, or if they had a child or two, feeling completely overwhelmed. So those were really difficult spaces to be in, and I didn't find allies in those spaces, and I think I really suffered because of it. I then went to a smaller, more humane firm, all men. I was the only woman, but just a whole different, gentler vibe. And the head of that firm was just a kind person. And we'll talk a little bit about paternalism versus allyship. Yeah. But that was where, I felt supported and I felt allies. So it doesn't need to necessarily be another woman. It can be men. And then the most important allies, and I don't want to take up too much time on this, but the most important allies in my career have been Jackie, my vice president, and my husband, who is my partner. And my husband, because he's always believed in women. He's always believed and supported powerful women. He would much rather stand with powerful women than stand on top, and it's been really important, and it's been, the reason that our company is so woman friendly and woman focused, and and that we all are allies.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
So the example that I'm going to use is probably driven. It is driven by the actions of others than me. It's entirely driven by great leadership, and it's actually alive and well happening in the District of New Jersey, the federal district we're sitting in right now, but driven by a group of very powerful female federal judges. One of them happens to be a relative of mine. This movement is based upon empirical studies that show, particularly in the trial disciplines like the ones I practice in, white-collar criminal defense, that there was a lack of representation of women. It tended to be an all-boys club, and it was when I came into it. And one of the things that these judges began doing and noting was that there were, if anybody's familiar with the sort of division of labor in a law firm, you push work down. The junior attorneys oftentimes draft briefs, do the research, get you ready to go into court, and then the more senior folks swoop in and sort of take all the credit for it. And that has been a tried and tested model of big law firms for as long as big law firms have existed. And these federal judges said, yeah, we get it. There's a value of experience. We're not going to tell you that that's the wrong model. But at the same token, there is also, you're imposing this artificial glass ceiling by virtue of just the way that you're structuring how you do business. And so what these judges began to impose upon people like me, who would be among those swooping in at the end, was, all right, well, I see that as a matter of professional ethics, when you draft a brief, your name goes on that brief. It usually often says on the brief. I see that Jane Smith is on the brief. I want to hear from Jane Smith about this particular issue because I know she did all the work. And that was, and the judges are unabashed. They come out and they show up at bar association events and they say, yeah, no, this is what we're doing. And that's how I'm going to run my courtroom. And if your client has a problem with him, tell him to talk to me. And I thought that was pretty badass. And I've seen it play out in ways that have allowed folks to get the experience that they needed to sort of bring equity back to the ranks of the people who are considered among the leaders in that particular discipline. And I think it's a combination of the people in charge, i.e. the judges, and enough education using empirical analysis about what that means to always be on the brief. You could make a career on being on the brief, but you're never going to rise in the levels of a law firm if you're only over on the brief. And that's a forced change in habit. That's not to say they're going to take over the entire argument, but if that person is sitting there, they're not going to be a potted plant, and these judges mandated it.
It's really incredible. Those are also 3 great examples and a great institutional example of a way to lift up some folks and make sure their voices get heard. They get the experience they need. That's great. The next question I have is also for you, Matt. And we
Sorry for my raspy voice. My kids got me sick last week, and I'm just getting over it.
It's good. So one of the things we all know that one of the greatest assets we have is time. And, you know, we want to support a lot of different people, a lot of different things, but how do you choose to spend your time? How do you choose who to mentor? Because it matters if you're truly trying to lift up, not just women, but different groups. How do you parse that out?
I'm going to be brutally honest. It's somebody who shows a desire. There's sort of a aversion in my mind to people who just kind of want to coast. And in all organizations, those people exist. But if somebody is ambitious, energetic, sort of brings a level of joy to the work, those are the people who are going to get my limited time. And whether like it or not, that's the way that it goes down in practice, is that I can think of 3 examples right now that are ongoing in my law firm where 2 of the folks love to set the world on fire. 1, So if you were advising people that crave allyship, I think it's to show the ambition. It's to show the desire to advance. And there needs to be more people like me that recognize that and then would invest in it. I get it. There's still people that probably don't get that trigger, don't understand what that means. But at least for people of my generation who think a certain way, that is the biggest trigger in my mind, that ambition, the energy surrounding it. You don't have to be perfect at what you're doing, but you got to show that you're willing to go the extra mile and actually do the work and do the work right, and openness to learning. A lot of younger generation today gets very frustrated by the learning process, and the practice of law, like I could imagine, is the same in the practice of medicine, in the accounting world, whatever the case may be, is a lot about trial and error. And we're doing a better job of delivering feedback from when I was a young associate. It would just be, oh, this is terrible, go redo it. Now my law firm invests in training about how to tell senior management, how senior management can tell subordinates to change things, how to deliver that difficult feedback. And I think all of those things, once they develop in a real live environment, are all triggers. Okay, this is somebody I'm willing to invest in.
Okay, thank you.
I also, if I could, just piggyback and say that I too, in my various roles in life, I'm a professor at the School of Social Work at Montclair State University, on top of being the CEO at the YWCA and other kind of nonprofit leadership groups that I'm in, that I end up becoming, seeking out and supporting folks and being a mentor kind of in those spaces. I think one of the things that we've seen a lot, especially in corporate spaces, pop up are these affinity groups, and that they have created opportunity, because I think one of the things, and it's so common, right, that it's the person who raises their hand, right, because you see that in them and then you get excited. But, maybe it's a social worker in me thinks about the people that aren't raising their hand and why aren't they raising their hand? And, there are, I obviously, I recognize my privilege that I have in my life as being a white female. Um, there may be a woman of color who doesn't feel comfortable for whatever reason not to raise her hand and say that she's interested. And so it's important to, I think, also make sure that when we're thinking about being allies and thinking about scoping out, who needs our, where support is needed, to do both. Because I think that it really, I mean, my experience really has been my students who wait after class to talk to me are the ones that 5 years later I'm still like in touch with them. So I know exactly what you're talking about and echo it. But I do often think about the folks that aren't staying after class and talking to me. And why is that? And, just making sure that we're thinking about ways to create space for them to still, be embraced in some way, even if, there are reasons that we may not understand because our lived experience may not be the same, to be able to get why they're not raising their hand or showing up and saying, I need help.
Exactly. Thank you for that input. This question came from a friend of mine who's a vice president at Kimberly-Clark, and she has so many people come to her for mentorship, so many that she's like, well, it's so hard for me to decide who I'm going to mentor. And a few years ago, she took a step back and she said, I'm going to mentor the people that I think might not get it otherwise. I'm going to be very conscious about who I choose because I only have so much time to mentor. So I think that's hard. It's hard because, you want to go for the hungriest, but also you got to think who really needs this more than anyone else.
Just briefly on that topic, I mean, I don't do so much mentoring. I just have a lot of people who reach out to me with specific questions about specific issues, and I always like to offer support. But even if someone reaches out to me about something that I don't necessarily know a lot about, like yesterday, a woman came to me and we had a meeting because she wants to start a Caribbean restaurant, maybe in Irvington, maybe in the Bergen County area where I'm the mayor. Now, I don't know anything about Caribbean food or restaurants other than what I've seen on the Bear, so I know nothing about restaurants. But I know about resources. I know about where to find help, and I can connect someone with something like that. So in terms of mentorship or allyship, I mean, it's not necessarily that you have to have, some kind of synchronicity. You have to listen and provide resources that you might have because you're a white woman or, a white man, or, there's networks that you've created.
Okay, thank you. Now, this next question is kind of getting at the elephant in the room, and then sometimes we have to think about the darker side of some potential some potential champions or mentors, and just thinking through what key indicators are there that a coach, mentor, supervisor is authentically supportive of inclusivity in the workplace. Helen?
So, also, for myself, we're talking about allyship and mentorship here, and they are different things. I just want to make sure that that they are two things, so sometimes the discussions are a little bit different between the two buckets, if you will. But what I will say is that it's wonderful when someone shows up for you, someone takes an interest because they see that you have an interest and kind of takes you under their wing, and I think for those of us who end up being in that space, whether or not we did it voluntarily or just it organically occurred that we ended up showing up. I mean, the things, there's someone who's going to advocate for you. It's someone who's going to have empathy. It's someone who's going to, all the things about how they're going to show up. So you almost have to flip that around, though, that, there is evil in the world, as we say, right? And so, there are people that, first of all, power and control is a thing. And so there are people that, because of their need for that, will seek out situations and relationships just so that they can manipulate you. And so, obviously at the YWCA, we do a lot of work in a lot of different spaces. But one of the things we, often do see for women and for women of color, when they are trying to navigate the workplace, that someone has latched onto them saying, I'm going to help you. But indeed, they're not there to help you, and that they, they're really there in some way to just, take your power and, take that power and control. And it could be sexual harassment. It could be sexual assault. There is a whole dark side of all of this that you just have to be aware of that can happen. in relation to these in these situations that appear. I think, look, you want to think that people are showing up for, what's their motivation for being there. I think for those of us who are allies and mentors, honestly, the motivation really needs to be selfless. Honestly, that there is no reason to do it other than someone may have, that that you wouldn't be in the seat that you were in if someone else had not been there and done that for you. So I think it's really important to be aware of that. I think the other thing we have to be very aware of, and this very often probably happens with people who look like me, that you don't have everyone's same lived experience, right? And so if you're taking someone on and being their mentor or in some way trying to be their ally, and this probably is almost like a gateway to the question about the paternalism too as well, is that if you don't have the same lived experience with someone, you may be giving them advice or suggesting a path for them that really will not work because their life experience and your life experience is really very different. And the rules are different. I mean, we are a society that is fraught with systemic racism, and so as a result, the rules are different for me and for a woman of color in the same environment. And so it's important to be aware of that when you are stepping into those roles as well, because it's one thing to want to be supportive, and even those that are selfless and in that space, but that is is really key. So I do encourage anyone who wants to be a mentor or wants to be an ally. It's so core to do the work yourself because you don't know what you don't know, as they say. And if you get into these spaces and you start trying to help, thinking that you're helping navigating people, sometimes it really isn't helpful if you don't have that level of awareness yourself about these things. So, I just would encourage everyone to, embrace the opportunities for allies and for mentors, but also to have a level of awareness around it. And the only other thing I would say is some work environments are more competitive than others. I mean, you started talking, you made a comment about like your first firm that you were in, which I could only imagine, navigating in that space. Sometimes people are not so supportive. They may seem like they're being supportive, but in the end, it really is some kind of competitive nature, or they are trying to hold you down, and that's more just in a professional sense. And that it's so, it's important to kind of, as we say, create your own board of directors. Make sure that you keep people close, but also make sure that you're really reviewing and kind of watching, their intentions and making sure that you're safe in the experience as well.
To that point, mentorship or allyship doesn't mean creating another miniature version of yourself. We're not talking about cloning. And I early on, when I would have interactions as I became a peer mentor and a leader of my practice group, I would say, oh, this is how I do it. This is how I'm in there all the time. And you have to be a little self-aware because you have to really start to understand that just because it's the way you do it and it might work for you, it doesn't work for everybody. And rather than try to clone a mini you really have to try to bring out that person's individuality in a way that works for the overall goal. And I'm lucky to be in a field where there's only not one way to skin the cat. In fact, there's many, many ways to be an advocate and to do what it is that we do. And I can think of one female colleague of mine in particular early on. She was blunt with me and she's like, I'm not you. You can get away with that. That works for you. That's your style. But I'm not you. And that was one of the most reflexive experiences that I've had as a mentor and as an ally. To be like, well, yeah, you're right. That isn't you. But I couldn't do the thing that you just did the same way because I'd probably lose my patience and I would fly off the handle maybe. But you just did it masterfully, and it was to the betterment of our goal.
So tagging on to that, and acknowledging that you can sometimes recognize something doesn't work for another person that you're talking to. I guess, what are some strategies to support and serve as an ally to a diverse group? Somebody that's totally different than you. Have you ever had to think through that?
Yeah. One of the best interview tips I ever got was by a paid consultant of my law firm that asks, this new generation ask them what their side hustle is. Everybody has one. For us, it's politics. It's not paying our bills, but something in us has decided that we want to get involved, and you can learn a lot about somebody by asking what their side hustle is. And I've gotten all kinds of answers. I like to play music, I like to write, I like to run marathons, I like to do this and that and the other thing. And you can learn a lot about somebody by asking that question, and that answer also transforms itself into what that person's skill set is. And from there, you can find out the person you're dealing with so you can help them achieve and blow that up, so to speak, as opposed to just saying, well, this is the way I've done this for 20 years, so this must be the right thing.
Okay, great. So trying to gain a little more understanding about that person in order to get past what you're different. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. It's listening to them, to their lived experience, to their questions, and what those questions mean to them, and not to bring your experience to it, because it can be completely irrelevant. What I did 30 years ago to start a business is very different now from starting a business. And so when I want to help someone get started on that journey, I'm not going to talk about, well, this is what I did. We'll start from where they are and what the circumstances are now and what their strengths are because of the diversity that they bring to the business venture.
Thank you. The next question I have is, how have you thoughtfully engaged others in your workplace to serve as an ally or support inclusivity? And can you give an example? So looking just throughout your general workplaces and you know that there needs to be a little bit more. How do you engage someone to bring that out?
So we have a very diverse company. It started just with me and my husband. We're sort of the same, except for, him being him and me being me. But we've made a conscious effort over the years to bring in people who don't look like us and who have different experiences from us, because we know that makes us a better company. And it's not always easy, and it doesn't always work. And you can't take one experience and say, well, it didn't work, so I'm not going to hire this group, because it just doesn't work. You just keep trying and trying. And the most recent experience we have, the this week experience we have, is with respect to neurodiversity and to being allied to people in the neurodiverse community. And we brought on after an internship, we brought on a new employee this week, a permanent employee who's on the autistic spectrum. And it was about, getting our company used to differences. And so it's whatever difference, bringing in someone who's different and getting the company used to that, just being comfortable with not necessarily being comfortable at first and then becoming comfortable and then becoming more than comfortable, like becoming joyful and seeing a bigger purpose in the organization, because of that's what diversity brings to the organization.
Thank you.
I really think, and what you're describing too is it's just modeling. I mean, it's creating an environment, it's doing it, and then having others in the organization see it, and then hopefully do it as well. But I think when we, there's so many individuals and that identify in different ways that really need champions to support them. Excuse me, my throat's dry for a second, but I find often that we have a few trans employees, in our environment, and it's important for us as an organization to create an environment where people understand the importance of pronouns and people understand the importance of talking about how you identify and explaining some of that when you do introductions in the room to kind of help create a comfort level. And with all different groups, I'm just using that one as an example, but I think it's just so important to be able to model it And, again, allyship really is exactly what you said. It's listening and then connecting them with resources. It's just, what do they need? It's not about you. It's not about what advice you have. It really isn't, it's about them. What do they need, and how can you help propel them forward? So being able to create that with every person in the organization who and again, that is why I think affinity groups really have become so popular. And I know my friend Jackie's in the room, who does a lot of this work as well. I mean, I think that that's exactly why we encourage folks to be able to come together as a group, so that they do feel safety in numbers, that they're not alone, and that they can identify, this is what we need, based on our life experience, to be able to elevate and grow here. And then knowing that the leadership is listening and hearing that, and then being able to adapt and support. And I just have to commend you on, creating a diverse workforce and bringing more and more folks into the spaces that identify in different ways, and having like a neurodiverse employee. I see this a lot with mental health challenges right now. We're a society that says we want people to be more comfortable, talking about their mental health and accessing mental health services. But, if you have an employee who has some serious mental health issues in your staff, you need to work with them and understand their mental health issues, and to be able to support them. And we don't necessarily, we say some of these things as a society, but we also have to learn to have the patience and educate ourselves, so that we can really, truly support and be allies for those employees that are on our teams and staffs.
I think it boils down to this. Say it out loud. The whole idea of these affinity groups working so well in a workplace is because they do gather strength in numbers. And as leaders in those environments, we have to get more comfortable being uncomfortable, right? It might not be my experience to deal with any number of the issues that some of these groups are presenting, but I've got to be able to engage with them and not be afraid. I think the worst thing we can do is stick our head up, and ignore it and expect that it'll just fix itself. In the political world, one of the things that I had a conversation with a colleague, and he says, "You're very comfortable talking about race. I've never seen that in a white dude." And I said, "It doesn't bother me. I think it educates me. I think I want to learn what life is like for you, as I would expect you would want to learn what life is like for me. And if I come about it that way, I think we get a little uncomfortable around these subjects. I know all of us, it's human nature. Like, well, we don't want to talk about that issue. Let's just leave it over there in the corner. And it can be well-intentioned too. You could have all the positive vibes about a particular affinity group, but if you don't actually talk about it out loud and make it part of your culture and say, hey, we actually address these issues, and this is how we listen, you're not getting anywhere. Just because you check a box that you have a group, or you have, we're friendly, put insert group here, it's not the same as talking about it out loud.
I agree. I mean, and my company that I belong to right now is a global company. It's very large. And when they instituted the ERGs, they put a senior level person in charge of each of them, of the women's, of the race and ethnicity, the veterans, of course, and LGBTQ. And I fit in every single category. So I didn't even know how to spend my time. But what I will tell you is that we had a separate conversation called Courageous Conversations, which was bringing all of those groups together. So and that was twice a year. And there was not only did a senior person lead each of those groups, there was an executive, an ELT member that was also championing each of them. And they showed up to every single meeting. And the different leaders, so the leader of the women's group showed up to the race and ethnicity one, showed up to the veterans one. So they supported each other, and they had meaningful comments. So you can definitely pay lip service by being there, but I think you can tell when someone's genuine when they're not. And that really made our company much more, it made it more efficient, made it function more effectively as a team. And we did have those uncomfortable conversations. But
In-
then you realize what people are going through.
In 2024, do we have to really walk on eggshells anymore, right? We can talk about these things out loud.
Well, we can only talk
sometimes.
about them if we do
In
it
a respectful
respectfully.
way.
But I
Sometimes.
do think we have to walk on eggshells. Sometimes we have, exactly, we have to be respectful. And sometimes with affinity groups, you have to be respectful of the fact that you might not be needed in that affinity group, that might need to be a space where the group is more comfortable without you being there, and you have to not be insulted by that, and you have to just be okay with that. I'm not needed in this conversation. When I'm wanted in the conversation, I will happily be in the conversation.
But, and I'm just thinking about politics and not necessarily party, but just, changing the landscape of politics, right? I mean, historically, and still very much so now, a lot of politics are white male. And so if we, trying to change that, and you do see this very much, in New Jersey state politics, you have like the Black Women's Caucus, you have the Women's Caucus, you have the Latina action, you have all these groups, and they're needed. They are truly needed because it is really the only safe space that individuals who identify in a certain way can get together and figure out how they can navigate a system that wasn't built for them, but that they deserve and have every right to be present in. It's one thing, and that I think from an ally perspective, that is really the important piece, is that when you show up for someone, it really truly sometimes to be a true ally is you really then you step away from your seat and let someone else sit in that seat and take it from you, someone who identifies in a different way from you, to be able to create that pathway for them and make, that resource and opportunity. And I think that that's really the key piece, is that it is a very active process, to be an ally and to really show up. And it has to, you really have to take your ego out of it, take your, the affinity group's not for you. You shouldn't be, we shouldn't be sitting there unless we identify in some way. To be there, and just, when they come, when the groups individually come and share this, this would be something that would be helpful for us to be able to, grow within the organization, in some way, really sitting back and listening to that and figuring out, how to make it happen. So, I think that they are so important to be able to create safe spaces for groups to come together, but it is so important for those of us who identify differently to show up for all of the different groups, and figure out how it is that we can pull and keep changing the face of every group. But politics, of course, is top of mind right now with where we are, 43 days out from the election, 42,
42 and a half.
Just on the politics level, it is the most sexist space that I am in. It astonishes me, the sexism in politics in New Jersey. Maybe I was naive going into it, but it's really astonishing. And as the mayor of the town, it's something that I deal with head on. But something you said really spoke to me, that, the most important part about being an ally is not trying to create someone to be like you, but to create the seat so that you can move out of the way so that they can be them.
Thank you. That's a great way to tie that up. I want to come back to something that was part of the first question, but just to get another specific example. And I'll just say, after 20 plus years in the Army, a very male-oriented organization, of course, right? Rightfully so. There's, for every person that I encountered that maybe wasn't super supportive of me, there was somebody that was. You can always, and that's always how I looked at it. I never got down on, I'm not getting what I want. So if you could offer an example of a specific person or a time when there was not a person that was an ally to you, I think that sharing a story like that right now would be very helpful. Gail, you spoke about it a little bit earlier, how in the law firm, that maybe is why you didn't go continuing in law, because you didn't have that support.
Yeah, I mean, in the first few firms that I was at, I didn't have that support. Actually, when you were talking about being on the briefs, there was one big case that I was on the brief because I had done literally all the research on the brief and
All the work.
yeah, well, yeah. And one of the parties is actually here today, so it's kind of funny. It brings everything full circle. But we won the case, went out to the celebratory lunch with the client and everything. And 6 months later, I got engaged. And 2 months after that, I was told I was written off the day I got engaged. So it was an interesting time to be a lawyer. But, later, like I said, I found another firm more accommodating. And the leader of that firm, I think he had very good intentions, and that was why I flourished. But he also didn't know quite how to be an ally, So he was trying to be a dad. So he's very paternalistic and always trying to protect me from situations, and that wasn't necessarily helpful. I'd find out later that he had gotten me out of, let's say, hot water on something, and didn't want me to know about it. I was like, no, it would have helped me to know, to be part of that situation. Like, so I just say, like, don't be paternalistic. When you're, for the men in the room, if you're want to be an ally to a woman, don't treat her like your daughter. Treat her like you would want your daughter to be treated.
That's perfect. I mean, that was one of our last questions, was going the direction of, sometimes people are very well intentioned, but it turns wrong. And so how, when someone's being when they do have great intentions, how do you correct that and kind of still keep them on your side?
You mean from the perspective of observing somebody else mentoring in the toxic way?
Well, not necessarily toxic necessarily. Like, people are very well intentioned, and just like you explained with that one boss. So your thoughts were to go to him and say, hey, no, you really need to let me suffer the consequences sometimes, right?
I mean, I was going to say, I mean, this is where a lot of, it's important for organizations to do like racial and cultural empathy training, implicit bias training. I'm looking at my guru back there. I mean, it's, and also for each of us to do self-awareness work. All of that helps navigate those situations. I mean, the issue is very, and that was not commonplace. So many people that are in, the younger folks coming up are much more apt to speak about, call something out as well as to say how they're feeling. That's not how, I'm 55. I mean, that's not how, I'm kind of on that cusp that we got it together, but, those that maybe, are a little older than me, maybe didn't end up having any of that experience of that training or the opportunity to even start to like widen their brainscape a little bit for those things. So I think, the more that we can raise workforces and put ourselves, if you're attached to professional organizations, put yourself in spaces where for you that you can do it, and then try to connect to people that that are also doing that work. It will definitely go a much longer way, because it is challenging to navigate when you have someone that is, positioning themselves in some way that they're there to be your, ally, a mentor, a supporter, and then basically that, they do start, it's kind of, as I said, goes bad, like it starts going in a direction that it's not helpful. If you're in a workplace, you don't obviously want it to impact you, but sometimes you have to call it out and, articulate it. I mean, and I think that is, as a society, the more that we, in a respectful way, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I mean, we have to call these things what they are. If someone says something racist, if someone, if someone is acting in a sexist way, if someone is, intimating something that is, inappropriate, we are way past a time where we just should be closing our eyes to any of that. And you don't have to call it out in a way that, you're like putting the place on fire, but you can sternly call it what it is and say, what are we going to do about it? I mean, I have to say, even my own staff, and I mean, obviously, I spend a lot of time doing this work. I mean, I myself was in an experience with one of our affinity groups, quite frankly, and I used a term I called, and I'll share the story. I called. It was a group of leaders of staff of color, and the staff wanted me to not call them staff of color. They wanted to be called individually, Black, Asian, Latina, however they identified. And it was a learning experience for me. I mean, I didn't get offended. I didn't punish anyone. I didn't, make their lives miserable, working in the organization. I took it as an opportunity to look back, do some research, talk to some people, talk to them more, understand. And it was a learning opportunity and a growth opportunity for me. So I do think sometimes it's important to share and point out these things, because the person on the other end doing it, it might be a significant opportunity for them to grow as a person as well.
Yeah, and I think that training component is huge, because at my law firm, we have a partners retreat every year. We all go to a offsite location, spend a couple of days, hang out. But one of our speakers this year was a guy who really broke the workforce down into generations. And I was sort of one of these straddle generations where given my birth year, I could have went either way. And I sort of identified with the prior generation as not the other generation. But his central hypothesis was that my generation, the one I identify with, we were the last generation of people that in the workplace got like screamed at, right? And despite all the trauma that created, we found a way to sort of like soldier on and deal with it. But if we go, because that's the model we had, and if we go and do that to the generation behind us, not only are we going to get sued, but we're also, they're going to shut down, and we're not going to get any productivity out of them, which is bad for business. And then he went down and did sort of a line by line generational. And then I started to see him identify with my kids, like, because now there are a couple in the way that he had stratified the population. He's now talking about like my youngest kid who's 6. And I'm like, holy crap, this guy's actually right, because that's how my 6-year-old behaves. He's not yet in the workforce, but that's the dynamic that he's developed into. And every action had an opposite and equal reaction, because the reasons that I created the 6-year-old that he's become is because I got yelled at in the workplace when I was in my 20s. And, so against the backdrop of the fact that there is a movement in our society to sort of push back on progress, there is this sort of living, breathing effort to say progress that we so eloquently are talking about up here is bad. There's attacks made in public discourse about DEI initiatives, which are disgusting. There's blatant racism in our public discourse. I hope it changes, but if we all just take a step back for a moment and realize that we are the product of the way we were treated, and maybe the way we were treated is not the right way, I think we'd go a long way towards making a better workforce.
I couldn't agree
and
more.
Make more
than,
money,
yeah.
and be more profitable.
Yes. It is. Yeah, a happy workforce is a key to profitability. But yeah, this screaming, being
the law firm.
Yeah, like that. Does anyone work now in a workplace where screaming is acceptable? Oh, okay, okay. We need to talk. But and it's not acceptable in any of the spaces I'm in. And now when I'm in a space where there's like really toxic behavior, I'm shocked, because I'm so used to now being on boards where diversity is really important, and the more diverse the board is, the better the board is, just by leaps and bounds. And the board will always comment about the great conversations, because there's so many different perspectives.
These are all great comments, and we may be able to hear on a couple more things from the panel. But before we ask any more questions internally here, we want to open it up to each of you to ask any questions you might have. Jackie's got a question. We knew we'd get one from her. Awesome, perfect.
So first of all, I want to say thank you to all 4 of you, probably 4 of the most inclusive leaders that I've had the pleasure. I'm hearing words like walking on eggshells, and it makes me a little bit nervous. This is what I do, a DEIB practice. So wouldn't it be better to say that we are showing our vulnerability as leaders?
It's great.
And what I love about what each and every one of you said was that you don't know everything. How is everyone supposed to know everything when things are changing at such warp speed? So, a little advice, if you could give it to me, please. What do you do with a leader who didn't get the inclusive memo? What do you do with a leader who said, you know what, I got all these employee resource groups, I don't have time to go to all of them, I need to go to all of them, so I'm collapsing and just doing away. What do we do with that?
Those people are out there too, in every organization.
Well, they are, and there's some organizations that have been in the news lately that did collapse their DEI programs. So I guess, yeah, if you were in that company, what would you do? I'm the moderator, so I don't have to answer.
Well, I think in my world, there has been a direct correlation made between functional DEI programs, I mean like real ones, and the bottom line, because our clients demand it. Large corporations, when they put out an RFP for legal services, they demand it. They demand that there be representation. So the best way to convince those crotchety old white men, usually, and I've got a couple of them that I could think of, is to say, well, it's going to make you money. And I'm being blunt, because there is a direct correlation in my world to those programs and productivity and profitability, because of the fact that we are catering to an audience who that means something to. So for all of you corporate leaders that might be in the businesses where they might be pushing back on that, you heard it from me first, that we're still looking for it, and we're still going to act in those ways because you demand from your professional services firms. Your demand is what drives our action. So if there's enough companies out there still doing it, we're still doing it. I don't think we're ever going to go back. My organization is a pretty forward-looking organization. I don't envision us being one of these people that collapse. Most of those people that have done it for headlines, political headlines, and that's what I meant about like the gorilla in the room, which is this notion of a political environment that has become so toxic that it has attacked everything and anything that even gives a smidgen of progress to our society. But if I'm a professional services firm and that's the business I know, I'm not changing a damn thing if the corporations that I want to hire me are mandating it. So the corporate America has the power right now.
Yeah. And also the consumers have the power, right? So, I mean, we need to vote our values, shop our values, live our values in every way. If there's a company that is, not operating in that way, not only would I get myself out of working there, but I would make sure that people aren't supporting it. A lot of this stuff, that in terms of all of this equity work that we are trying, those of us that are advocates for it and trying to push it ahead, it really happens in two ways. One is exactly what you said. You have to make the case so that and again, usually white male, who is
Older than me.
Yeah, older than you. That's focused on it not being something to support. Making the connection for them why why to do it. But it doesn't always work. There was a very big corporate head of a program of a business here in New Jersey that was known to he had all white leadership. He had all all of his practices. Everything was very centric in that direction. And you would try to bring in equity programs. Our organization went and tried to do work with them. They were approached over and over again. Nothing for years. His son married a black woman, and then he had biracial grandchildren. And within about 5 years, it was the most diverse company you had ever seen. And you know why? Because his life experience changed, and he suddenly looked at the world through a different lens. So the reality of it is, and I say this with our work at the YW all the time, there's a continuum of people. There are people that are all the way over here that are just racist and not supportive of any type of equity initiative. There are people over here that are all for it. And then there's the people in the middle. Our work at this point is we focus on the people in the middle, because the people over here aren't coming over until they have a life experience that moves them over. And that life experience can be related to money, but then it's truly not real and authentic in any way nonetheless. But or it's something that brings them over. So I would say that it's just for those of us that are out there that have these belief systems that this is a priority. Again, you support businesses that are creating diverse workforces. You make sure that those are the leaders that get the microphones and that are sitting in the spaces and that are speaking, so that they can model it for others. And again, you vote your values, you shop your values, and you surround yourself with your values. And I think that's the kind of positive peer pressure, if you will, that ultimately, unfortunately, it's urgent and it's not happening fast enough in any of these spaces, but that is the wave to how to make it happen.
I just have to say, I'm sorry, that just to get rid of a bias here, it's a crotchety, not so old female.
Really?
That could be, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say great insights so far. I want to make
I know
sure-
my audience. I mean,
wanna make
I know what my role is here, so I'm not going to make jokes about it.
There's bias everywhere against different DEI, and it maybe you're all about racial equality, but you're not about LGBTQ equality.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Gail.
I mean, to answer the question, I mean, there is, I'm involved with a lot of different organizations, and there is one organization that, I had seen go very far in terms of DEI, and I've seen some slippage, and I'm getting ready to have that conversation, which is basically going to be, do you see you're having more problems in your organization? Do you see there's more drama? You see there's more unhappy people? There's more people walking out the door? This is because you have lost the focus that your company used to have on DEI, and you need to keep it going. I can see that organization sort of going downhill, and you have to. I have to have that uncomfortable conversation, and in my own workplace, I've had to have uncomfortable conversations. One, just a quick anecdote. One of our more recent hires, in the last year, we hired a white Southern man. So I said, he's our DEI hire, because we didn't have anyone who looked like him in our business. But in one of our first in-person meetings, because he works mostly remotely, he used like a really bad racial slur. I mean, he said that he was, if he was talking to this, potential customer, and they were trying to Jew him down, and I was like, yeah, it was, and not everybody in the room understood that it was a slur, but I did, and at that moment, I had to call him out and say, we're gonna, this is something that you've said, it's really offensive, and we're gonna talk about it after the meeting, why it's offensive. And we had to have a long talk, and I had to explain to him why it was offensive, because in his culture, it wasn't offensive. And, that we had to really consider if he could fit with our organization. And he's still with the organization. I think he learned from that, and I think we're all better off because we had that conversation. Because my impulse was okay, I just want to fire him. But I think that we were better off having had the conversation, even though it was really difficult.
That's a great point too, because it's just because someone makes a mistake doesn't mean that they can't come back and they can't learn. And I would just say, belonging to an organization that I couldn't quit because I was in the Army and I was closeted under DADT so I couldn't leave it, not very easily at least. I think empirical evidence is a great, got to flash it in front of their face, but then also sharing your story, sharing your anecdotes, because I got a lot of people to love me when they didn't know I was gay. And then when they found out I was, they were like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This person is the same person I remember. They have to come to terms with it. So share your stories. If you're on that, I think seeing through a different lens, if it's your personal family, you can't wait for everybody to have biracial kids, right? But you can share a story of somebody so that their eyes are opened, right? But I just want to say thank you to each of you. It's my pleasure to get to know all of you on this panel and to hear your stories. And thank you very much. Please question these folks afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you.